Ohio State is still playing, but the schedule has changed. So if you were expecting a talk on Tuesday, it's too late. Ryan Day has already had his first press conference to prepare for the Rose Bowl. That was on Monday. Now it's Takeaway Tuesday as the tournament continues. A tournament Takeaway Tuesday with Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. Bill, just an absolutely riveting Ryan Day press conference as the Buckeyes turn the page from beating the hell out of Tennessee and getting ready for the rematch against Oregon in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, those bowl mandated Zoom calls are always very illuminating, especially the part where the coaches are forced to talk about how nice the bowl is, which is what Ryan Day had to do to kick it off. Yeah, not unexpectedly. There wasn't a whole lot to take away there. I think when we get later on in the week when we're talking to people, and definitely when we're on the ground in Pasadena, as the game gets closer, it'll be, I think, if not more informative, at least more entertaining when we start talking with people. But so I don't know that there were like monumental takeaways from what Ryan Day said on Monday. I mean, maybe the biggest thing for me, at least as it pertains to, on the field, how is Ohio State going to try to attack Oregon here when they meet for the second time, is sticking with that rotation at the guard position. Ryan Day said it was interesting. He was like pretty emphatic, like, we're going to do it. Like, it worked great. We're going to do it. And then he said, but, we'll also reassess it during the week and we'll see what gives us the best chance to win. So he did leave himself that door open, I guess, to deviate from the plan that we saw against Tennessee. But it did work. Like, I was very nervous that it wasn't going to work. And I was, I guess, proved foolish there. That's fine. I was surprised by how well it worked. I was mostly surprised by just Luke Montgomery showing up and moving people. Yep. He was excellent in that game. So I remain on alert for Luke Montgomery, having played so well against Tennessee, continuing to play that well in practice, and for Ohio State to line up in the Rose Bowl and at least maybe not rotate at the left guard position. Maybe that becomes more of a right guard specific situation. We'll see how that develops. But according to Ryan Day, the plan at the moment remains to rotate all three of those guys, coming off of how well all three played against Tennessee.
Maybe that's kind of what Ryan Day means when he talks about finding consistency and carrying over what worked and building off that. Like, we spent 3 weeks talking about the offensive line, and he wants us to keep talking about the rotation and Luke Montgomery and asking tons of questions about the offensive line, because that leaves very little time to talk about anything else.
But the other things to talk about are good things. Like, they played really well. Like, I don't know. It's weird. Like, I had so many concerns about the Tennessee game. Some of it schematical and personnel driven, definitely, but also like a lot of emotional, like, what kind of version of Ohio State are we going to get? And they just answered all those questions so emphatically that now it's just like two good teams are going to play and one of them's going to win. And there are things to break down within that matchup, but like all the sort of like, I don't know, like ancillary things or just like large glaring questions about Ohio State. Like I actually don't, like, that's not where my mind is as I go into the game. So if Ryan Day's strategy is to distract us with the offensive line thing, I guess it's not a bad strategy. But the things I would, at least that I'm interested in talking about otherwise, are all good things about like how well the defense played and how deadly that passing attack looked. Right. So it's their fault for looking so good against Tennessee that I don't think the alternatives to the offensive line discussion would be all that distracting.
What a fascinating new dynamic for this team, because they clearly, and you heard Donovan Jackson most specifically talk about the criticism that Ohio State took. He mentioned it on Saturday night after the game, and like how badly they wanted to prove people wrong. Like, and we were sitting there in the immediate aftermath of November 30th and the ensuing weeks. Like, how are they going to respond emotionally? What is the game plan approach? How is that going to be tweaked? And like looking at everything that happened in that game for so long, and it was a pile of negativity, as is often the case when they lose games. And now they're going to go to Pasadena after reminding the world what they look like when they're at their best and getting a lot of back pats instead of kicks in the butt. And like, now that's a new thing that you have to deal with. I don't imagine that that's going to be the problem. I don't think they're going to have any problem finding motivation either, since this team already beat them. But it's always something. There's always something for them to manage, and now it's going to be getting praise instead of criticism.
That'll be an interesting dynamic. I don't know. certainly, I think any praise that Ohio State gets will be deserved, or and maybe praise isn't the right word, but people just kind of repositioning themselves as now thinking that Ohio State is once again perhaps the best team in college football. I think at the very least one of the two best teams, and that we'll see both of them on the field in Pasadena on Saturday. Like I'm definitely in that position. Like I picked Ohio State to lose against Tennessee, and I could not have been more hilariously wrong about that. And I'll like I'll own that. It was a bad read on my part. But anybody else who was like me, just like wondering what that team was going to look like, I think are now just like, oh my god, like if this is what they're going to look like, then watch out, kind of thing. But I still think there'll probably be enough people picking Oregon for Ohio State to hold on to that we're being doubted kind of conversation, because even if they're not, the other part of that is like, well, don't let them switch sides on you now, like kind of thing. Like remember what everybody sort of thought of you before you went out and beat Tennessee the way that you did. So I think that mindset, even in a game where Ohio State was a touchdown favorite, that mindset served them quite well. I think they're a small favorite right now as we're having this conversation against Oregon, and I think they'll be able to cultivate similar feelings, or an edge, I guess, going into this game. And it helps too that they lost the last time they played the Oregon, so that gives them even more reason to have it.
Yeah, I don't actually envision that being difficult for Ohio State to do, but it is a role reversal from what happened before, at least throughout the course of this month. But again, it won't be very difficult to go back and find critical things that were said about them and how that would apply to going through multiple games, not just against Tennessee. Like they can do that here or elsewhere, or pretty much anywhere, because it was not easy to find positives coming out of the last game that they played in the regular season. But I imagine that the coaching staff, when Ryan Day talks about them getting back in there and they wanted to celebrate, have their champions meeting as they turn the page, and then broke off, position groups to look at the film, there's still going to be things that they didn't execute perfectly against Tennessee, which may sound difficult to believe, but like Berm said it in the immediate aftermath on Saturday night on Snap Judgments, like they could have won that game 50-0. And this is not coming up from a place of, oh, they should have, because I don't feel that way. You have to win a playoff game any way you can. You have to beat SEC opponents any way you can. I will not nitpick that performance, but the coaching staff will. Like that's their job to do that, and that will include the offensive line. If not for a face mask penalty on the opening drive, like that, the at least start of the game could have been very different. I think ultimately Ohio State would have worn down Tennessee no matter what, but that did allow them to continue to get on the front foot and then put it on Tennessee's throat immediately, where they were a fraction of an inch or a hand placement away from that not being the case. So they'll find stuff for the offensive line. They'll look at things that they could have done better to, I don't know how much better they could have done, but to stop the quarterback run, because that actually has real world application again to Oregon, because we've seen Dylan Gabriel do that specific to this team. So like they'll do that. And I don't imagine it'll be that difficult, because the coaching staff just proved over the last 3 weeks that when they were given time and a challenge and something to correct, they did a masterful job doing so.
Yeah, I'm with you that I think that game more than likely would have played out the exact same way that it did, even if Ohio State had to punt on its opening drive there. But it was the right call. Like it was a penalty call there.
Not saying they got a break from the officials, because the officials more than made up for that with two incredible screw jobs. So
they sure did. Yeah, no doubt about that. But you can look at that rep. You can look at like, I don't know, the one throw that Will Howard missed in the game, and really harp on that one to try to find a way. They played really well. I think no team comes away from a game thinking that it played perfectly. There's some stuff in the run game that I think Ohio State can continue to clean up that I'm sure will have their attention. I think I think like the test against the Tennessee defense was a challenging one. But I also kind of felt like Ohio State showed up ready for it, and Tennessee showed up. I don't know if they were like underestimating Ohio State or what, but like Tennessee just got punched in the mouth and like kind of laid down on defense. Maybe the same would happen to Oregon if you did that to them. I guess there haven't been many teams that have done that to the Ducks this year. So if you put them in an uncomfortable position, maybe the same thing would happen. But I'm sure that there's a conversation happening, whatever they do this week and then next week leading into the game, about just having to be that much more crisp with your execution, because Oregon has been a pretty precise team too. And then for the defense as well as it's played, and it's played excellently since the Oregon game, and I think they're proud of that, and they're not afraid to talk about it with some of the stuff that Jim Knowles was saying after the Tennessee game. I think they all know that this is the real test of where they are, right? It was posed to Ryan Day that you made all these changes after the Oregon game, but you haven't really played an offense like Oregon since then. So this will tell us everything we need to know about what those adjustments, or I guess the impact of those adjustments. And I believe that they will make a big impact in this game. I think Ohio State's defense is much better off, but there's enough there too to have Ohio State's attention. So maybe if Ohio State had like beaten Michigan and then went to the Big Ten championship and somehow lost that game and then still ended up on its path, including beating Tennessee the way that it did, maybe they'd be feeling a little fat and happy, but I don't think that they are. I think that they are eager to show people what we saw on Saturday night is who they are and who they intend on being throughout this entire postseason. So I'm not worried about Ohio State's ability or lack thereof to find the right frame of mind for this game against Oregon.
You must not have got the memo that if you lose the Big Ten championship game, you get the easiest path you could possibly imagine.
You do. That is true. I guess it would have been advantageous to go to the Big Ten championship game and lose, because then you can play 2 G5 teams on your way to the college football playoff semifinals.
It's the real perk. Who knew?
That's right. Yeah.
Great system you got there, CFP. Yeah. Be a real shame if somebody broke it for you. I was, as I love to do, combing through the PFF numbers to go back to the offensive line, because like in my mind, I'm thinking I saw a bunch of times where Luke Montgomery was burying somebody 6 feet in the ground, or Tegra finished off some impressive drives, especially in the second half, and punching in. I think that Quinshon play in the red zone where he and Josh Fryer had the combo block going, and and I didn't remember one as specifically for Austin Sareveld, which it can often be a good thing if you're not paying a ton of attention to the guard, but I did notice him when he came out after picking up that injury, and it was like he still finished with more snaps than the other two. I think it was 46. But the highest, like one of the highest graded performances for Tegra Chabot of the year, and a pretty remarkably, it was over 70 overall for Luke Montgomery in this game. For us to go into it and be like, it's inexperience or rotation, and for those guys to perform the way they did, I just don't know that I can give them enough credit for doing that. That was a very good Tennessee defensive front, and they did get a little bit shorthanded as the game went on, but I think having to deal with the physicality Ohio State was playing with, it has to be part of that as well. So I've never been a fan of the rotation. Some of it may well be forced by whatever it is that Austin Sareveld has been dealing with physically for the last couple of weeks. But if so, they have found a good solution, and they've also found a version of Luke Montgomery that looks ready for the challenge that 2 months ago he really didn't.
His mindset at the position was the thing that was most apparent to me. Just the physicality he plays with, the tenacity, like the pancake block that everybody saw was one thing. I think at another point I turned over to you and showed you a play on a 4th down where Donovan Jackson had a really good pass rusher up against James Pierce Jr. But while James Pierce Jr. was still upright and engaged with Donovan, Luke Montgomery just ran over and plowed him into the ground. It's like that kid likes to hit people and he likes to move people, and that is your job description when you are an offensive lineman. So I think that, and I got that I don't want this to come off the wrong way, because I think Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer have played really well this year, and Ohio State I think has found a way to work around a lot of its offensive line issues and injuries and stuff. But Seth McLaughlin to me just played with so much energy that I really felt like that was lacking when he immediately went out of the lineup. And part of me now feels like maybe Luke Montgomery is the guy that can bring that to the table. And again, I'm not trying to criticize anyone, because I think they have, the tackles have played well. I think Donovan Jackson's it's hard to play with energy when you're still trying to figure out how to play a brand new position. Sometimes I totally understand that, but I think Luke, maybe it's just like Luke doesn't know any better, and he's playing for the first time. And the only thing you can do, I guess, or can kind of control in that situation is your effort. And he played with a ton of it in a way that felt a little contagious to me when he was out there on the field. So if he can bring in that to the equation, then I think Ohio State's offensive line will be all right. And whatever it is about this rotation that brought out I think maybe the best Integra Shabola, you kind of want to keep cultivating that too. So I'll eat the biggest crow you can give me, I guess, if Ohio State gets to the through the national championship game with a rotation at the guard position, because that just to me just felt like a totally untenable situation. But they really made it work against Tennessee. And I think if everyone continues to play at the level they played at against Tennessee, then they can make it work against anybody. They will face more very good off defensive lines. Oregon's got a good defensive line, and especially a good tackle. If it's Texas has a good defensive line. If it's Notre Dame, Penn State, Georgia, whoever in the national title, like obviously those teams have good defensive lines too. It's not getting any easier for Ohio State from here on out. But that was still one of the more difficult challenges you could throw at a reworked / rotating offensive line, and Ohio State handled it very well. So how could you not be confident in them doing it moving forward?
Bill, you raised a point in there about the energy and Luke Montgomery providing that. I had not considered this until the words came out of your mouth, but the person who used to celebrate amongst the offensive linemen was Seth McLaughlin, like pointing for first downs. And I distinctly remember one of these with Luke Montgomery standing up and making that celebration and pointing the fingers after a penalty and getting the chains moving. I don't know how much stock to put in that, the energy, the value of it.
I think it matters. Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think it does matter. And they needed somebody to do that in the immediate aftermath of losing the starting center, a month after losing a starting left tackle. Like, you could understand why there might have been a little bit of, if not a full-blown crisis of confidence, at least just not the same camaraderie, chemistry, celebration, any other C word that you can use to apply to it, cohesion, like whatever. I mean, it wasn't quite the same. And that's not to justify or make an excuse in hindsight. It did not feel or look the same as it did on Saturday night. And I think that if Luke Montgomery is the catalyst for that, cool.
Yeah,
that's all the C words I got.
Cool. Yeah. No, it was either. I think it must have been Quinshawn's second rushing touchdown in the second half. I think it was one of his 2 touchdown runs where there was like a massive body sort of like where the ball crossed the goal line. And then if you just watch it, you see like Luke Montgomery like navigating the massive human beings to make sure he can put himself in a position where everybody can see him. And then he's like firing up the south stands, like celebrating the way you might normally see a skill player who actually scored a touchdown celebrating. So as silly as it sounds, I do think it's very important. And I definitely understand if there was any kind of dip in the confidence especially after you lose Seth, because of how important Seth was. And I guess I don't want to be dismissive of the impact of like somebody else playing with that kind of juice that gets the whole line. And honestly, the whole offense, like it's not just the 5 guys on the line who feed off of that. Plenty of people talked about, Will Howard, receivers, running backs, talked about Seth McLaughlin and the joy that he played with. Sort of just, you can't help but kind of try to match it when you're out there playing too. And like it helps when you're kicking the crap out of a team. I understand that. Yeah. But Seth brought that consistently, even when things weren't always going, 100% right for the offense. So I hope Luke continues to bring it. Because if he does, that could be a thing where you could like look back at the end of the year, like, man, what a spark that was.
We didn't get into the Zoom to ask a question on Monday. It was a 20-minute session with Ryan Day. If you had, what would your question have been?
It was sort of asked, and not, I guess maybe not really answered, but I have to go back and rewatch some of these run calls that Ohio State was throwing out there against Tennessee. But I just thought it felt like they got like ran counter like a dozen different ways in that game, just with like the way they would line up, the way they would shift in motion, some of the backfield actions that they were packaging with that run play, which sort of very much felt like their base run play in that game. And I tried to ask Chip Kelly about it before the game going into it. And of course, he wouldn't want to say too much about it, but Whether it's Ryan Day or Chip Kelly or or Justin Fry, anybody involved with coordinating Ohio State's run game, how they landed on that as like the play that might work best for this group of offensive linemen. I know like during the Michigan game, Joel Klatt was talking a bunch about you have to run more gap scheme. This inside zone stuff's not working. That was apparent to everybody who was watching the game, but I wasn't 100% certain whether or not Ohio State would like deviate from that, and then basically like kind of like change the run play that they try to hang their hat on, and they did, and it worked really well. So I would love to dig into that some more about why that was what they landed on. What about those plays like work best for the interior guys that they're using? Because I'd imagine we're going to continue to see a pretty healthy dose of it.
Yeah, I mean, however they got there, if they spun the wheel or flipped a coin or just realized that suited the personnel the best, like they got an answer that worked. And I have to imagine it'll be the same. The challenge against Oregon is not quite the same up front as it is against Tennessee. Like, you know, we've seen this already. The tackles for Oregon are real ones. And I'm not saying that they're quite to the level as Michigan, but they're not all that far off. So does I get to stay the same? They found something that worked. Does it apply the same against Oregon as it did against Tennessee? I really don't know the answer to that. I think that's what makes it a fascinating question. Not that, and it's also, I think it's worth reminding when we go back and when we talk about the loss to Oregon, the offense certainly did its part in that game. They could have finished off one or two other drives. They definitely did not benefit from the fumble from Quinshon Judkins early on. If they don't get called for a bogus, in my opinion, pass interference on Jeremiah Smith, like we might not be having any of these conversations at all. The season would have potentially played out very differently. But, you know, how much of that, I guess, do you take from playing them the first time? You know their personnel, and you also know what worked so effectively against Tennessee. How do you mix and match that? I think that's the art of coaching, and we won't really know the answer probably until they step on the field in the Rose Bowl.
No, but I think it was interesting to me even before the Tennessee game. Really, it must have been on Selection Sunday when the bracket came out. Like Ryan Day was referencing the familiarity with a lot of teams on that end of the bracket. Like Tennessee wasn't one of them, but of course Oregon was, and even I think he was even talking about Clemson a little bit. If Clemson were able to get out of that game with Texas and be playing Arizona State this weekend instead of the Longhorns, but I think it was predominantly Oregon because I think in a lot of ways Ohio State did play very well in that game, especially offensively. And if that's the questions coming out of the Michigan game, like how do you get this offense right? It's like, well, they've been on the field with the quote unquote like best team in their kind of region of this thing and performed really well offensively in that game. So I think you can apply some of the success that Ohio State had throwing the ball there. And now you have, I don't think it's too much to say that the Tennessee game might have been like the best combination of Ryan Day's prowess as a passing game designer with Chip Kelly's prowess as a run game designer. And boy, that's a heck of a thing to have in the college football playoffs. So you got to go do it again. Like as Ryan Day always says, you got to go put it out on the field. But I would imagine they're feeling quite good about their ability to go put some points on the board against the Ducks.
That feels like the conversation that we had in February and March when Chip Kelly replaced longtime Ohio State offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien. Was like Chip Kelly's run game and Ryan Day's passing attack. Holy cow, that's going to be dangerous. And it's like, well, you're just going to have to wait till game 13 to really see it at its fully formed potential, which maybe 12 would have been better. But
I think 12 would have been better. Yeah.
But they did what they did, and it got them one step closer to a national championship because they play in 8 days in the Rose Bowl against Oregon. We'll have many more opportunities to talk about Ohio State. The next media availability is going to be Friday. We will see some practice later on in the week. I don't know exactly what the practice schedule looks like because there is Christmas in the middle of this preparation. That was one logistical question that I would have wanted to ask Ryan Day, managing that, because they don't have to go straight through all week long practicing. Like they do have this nice sort of mini bye a week and a half before preparation. They leave on Sunday. We know they'll practice Friday and Saturday, and then they get out there to the site on Sunday. But I'm sure there'll be some other ways that I can maybe get the answer to the question that I have logistically. Maybe we won't get it till Friday, but who cares? We'll break it down when we get there. Hope you all have some happy holidays. We're going to continue with the content as if There was no Christmas on Wednesday, so there will be a podcast daily. There will be stuff on Thursday. There'll be Freaky Friday, the whole deal, because this is a huge game and we're excited to cover it with as many different angles as we possibly can, including a Tuesday takeaway on the podcast daily. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.